In this video, I'm going to be explaining exactly what I changed to go from the low 80s to the low 90s. Now, if you're watching this, you're probably a pitcher stuck between that 75 to 85 mile per hour range. You're working really hard, but you just don't know what to do to take that next step and make a big jump. And if this is our first time meeting, my name is Eric Cartafalsa. I trained myself into the low 90s, and now I help pitchers all over the world make the same transformation. And on this channel, all we do is talk about throwing 90 miles per hour. So if you don't want to hear about throwing 90, then click away. Okay, so before I explain the differences in my training from when I was in the low 80s versus the low 90s, I'm going to talk about the things that were similar. So first one was I was consistently throwing. Now, when I was in the low 80s and the low 90s, I was consistently doing throwing. But the main differences I'll outline when I get to those. I was also doing lifting consistently. I was always in the weight room, I was working hard, and I was making sure I was getting my lifts in and hitting all areas of my body. I was also consistently doing drill work. I knew that drills were a big part of throwing harder, but when I was in the low 80s, I really didn't have any idea what I was doing, and we'll get to that. And the last thing, I was doing mobility consistently. So these four things in the middle here are constants that you should be having in your program. And even when you do, you might still not be able to see a velocity jump because you're not doing the right things. And that's the case that I was in when I was in the low 80s. I didn't know what to do, but I was consistently doing these four things in both areas of my pitching career, and we're now going to talk about the key differences. All right, so when I was in the low 80s, throwing was mainly based around drills and trying to hit certain positions. So a lot of the times, whenever I would throw, whenever I would play catch, when I was still pitching in the low 80s, I just focused on trying to hit certain positions. I would see all these big leaguers, I would see these top level college arms with really good mechanics, and I tried to emulate those. And to do that, I would pull certain drills that I thought were the key to their mechanics, and I would try them out on my own. And this really didn't do anything for me. It really honestly just caused me to overthink a whole bunch, and I was never able to make that jump, okay? And the second thing I was doing was lifting like a bodybuilder, and I was way more focused on getting big and strong rather than being athletic. And, this helped me a little bit. I was able to make like a 1 to 2 mile per hour jump from getting bigger overall, but at a certain point, I actually saw diminishing returns because I was big, I was strong, but I was really tight and I couldn't move fast on the mound. I'm 5'11", so I don't have the longest levers, and I need to leverage the levers that I do have and move really quick down the mound. And getting absolutely huge was not the way for me to do that, and I didn't know that, okay? The third thing was I was doing little to no sprints or plyometric work. I was really just relying on throwing, lifting, and mobility. And, like I said before, being 5'11", I need to leverage those levers and move down the mound faster. And because I was neglecting athletic work, sprints, plyometrics, jumping, I was never able to develop that quick twitch muscle that I would actually need to, move faster down the mound and eventually throw harder. I was completely neglecting this. And this was honestly super, super detrimental to my pitching velocity at that time. Okay. And the next thing was I constantly changed my routine around and pulled things from the internet rather than doing the things that my body specifically needed to throw harder, okay? Now, I know that's a mouthful, but this is probably where most guys go wrong. With all of this information that we have now at our fingertips, it's very easy for you to go pull 10 different drills off of social media, try them out for your own, and a lot of the times they don't end up working. And the reason for that is twofold. One, it's not what you need specifically, and two, you're not consistent enough to actually stay with whatever it is. And even if you do stay consistent and it's not the right thing, you're just, chipping away at something that's completely irrelevant to your deficiencies specifically. And this is what I did for so long. I was trying to find all these drills, find all these routines, find all these patterns on social media, and I never had the right plan for me specifically because, as we all know, as pitchers, everybody's throw looks different, okay? The way that you throw is different than the way that I throw, is different than the way that everybody else throws, okay? So finding the right drills and the right patterns that fit the way that you move was super, super needed for me. I was trying to copy guys who were 6'5", nowhere near my stature, and it's no wonder that those things didn't work for me and I stayed stuck in the low 80s, all right? And the last thing was I spammed plyo balls. Now, I was a huge proponent of plyo balls, probably from my junior year of high school up until when I started throwing in the low 90s. And the reason for that is because I saw everybody else doing them. I saw all the big leaguers doing them. Some of my teammates who threw harder than me, they did them. So I thought that plyos were a non-negotiable in guys that throw hard. And that couldn't be further from the truth, okay? And it goes back to my previous point in, I was pulling things off the internet that I thought would help me. And plyo drills were a huge part of that. I would see, try this plyo routine to gain 10 miles per hour. I was doing it and I didn't throw any harder, And come to find out later in my career, when I was throwing in the low 90s, which I'll get to, plyos had a very low translation to my mechanics on the mound because it's a completely different feel, right? A plyo ball's squishy, it doesn't have seams, you're throwing it into a wall like 10 to 15 feet in front of you, and a lot of the times, you're really unintentional with those throws. And on top of that, because the feel is different, your brain recognizes those patterns as something different than when you have a baseball in your hand, okay? So that is something you need to be super aware of. It's something that I wasn't aware of, and I wish I knew this earlier, okay? So now getting into what I did to get into the low 90s. Okay, first thing, my throwing was athletic focused over drill focused. At some point I realized that all of this stuff wasn't working. That's a terrible arrow. That stuff wasn't working, okay? So I needed to switch it up. I needed to let my body be free, let my body be loose. So I did a ton of athletic catch. And if you don't know what athletic catch is, it's basically throwing like a position player. Throws on the run, Jeter throws, turning two, outfield throws, whatever you want, okay? And I got creative with it, So I put my body into different positions and taught myself to be an athlete because as pitchers, we are athletes, okay? You hear it all the time, like, oh, pitchers aren't athletes. That can't be further from the truth. The reason why people say pitchers aren't athletes is because when guys become a PO, they start just focusing on pitching, okay? And they're doing all these drills, they're trying to fine tune their mechanics all the time, and they lose their athleticism, okay? You need to stay in your athleticism as a baseball player, okay? So, like I said, doing things like throwing from the infield, on the run, Derek Jeter, outfield throws, that really helped me, okay? The next thing was I lifted 2 to 3 times a week, focusing on explosiveness and transferability to the mound. Pitcher-specific lifts do exist, okay? And when I was in the low 80s, I was bought into the idea that I just need to get big and strong, okay? And that couldn't be further from the truth. When I moved to 2 to 3 days a week and was just explosive and focused on movements that actually transfer, I was able to get strong, yes, but in the positions that I would need on the mound, okay? And not only getting into those positions, but exploding out of them, okay? Because it's a 2-part equation when it comes to lifting, okay? And you might be asking yourself, why did you only focus on lifting 2 to 3 times a week? Well, that's because lifting was not the bottleneck for me. And for a lot of you, you're really strong, but you still throw in the low 80s. Getting strong and lifting probably isn't the biggest thing holding you back. And that was the case for me as well, I needed to get more athletic. I needed to move better. And on top of that, I needed to focus on recovery as well. So 2 to 3 hard and heavy lifts, focusing on explosiveness and transferability to the mound were absolutely huge in my velocity jump. Okay, moving on. I allowed myself to let it eat and throw with intent rather than playing it safe. Okay, over here, when I was doing drill work, when I was being super meticulous with all of the positions I was trying to get into, I never focused on intent. Okay, and the age old saying goes, in order to throw hard, you need to throw hard. That is so true. Okay, you need to actually train the skill of throwing hard. Okay, and I did that by, velocity bullpens, pull downs, and also long toss. But what these two things did for me was teach my body to move fast and, give my nervous system the stimulus of throwing at 100%. Because if you just practice at 60 to 70% and try to hit these positions, you're never going to throw harder because you're never giving your body the stimulus to adapt and throw harder. Okay, so those two things were huge. And the last point I have here is I had a plan to follow and did not deviate or try to copy from social media. I'll say that again. I had a plan to follow and did not deviate and try to copy from social media. And what this allowed me to do was stay consistent and keep tunnel vision on the things that I actually needed. Because if you're doing things that have no application to your body, to your mechanics, then you are wasting time. Okay, I cannot stress that enough. So when I had a plan, when I had that tunnel vision, when was just able to focus on what I needed to focus on, I threw way harder.